Alright, today we're going to take a look at the basics of using the selection tools available to you in Adobe Photoshop CS4. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up a new file. Again, I'll change my pixels to inches, make my width 10 by 8, and I'll also make sure that my resolution is set on 300 pixels per inch. I want my background contents again to be white. I'll click OK. And now I have my canvas that comes up. I'll zoom out so that it's easy to see on the screen. Now, your selection tools are in a couple places, and they're real close to each other, so that's easy. First of all, the second option down in your toolbar is your rectangular marquee tool, your elliptical marquee tool, your single row marquee tool, or your single column marquee tool. Now, obviously, the first two are pretty easy. The rectangular marquee tool allows you to make rectangular shapes. These are areas of selection. So you're not actually drawing these, you're actually just selecting these areas. The elliptical marquee tool does a similar thing, except, of course, some type of elliptical shape, some type of ellipse. Now, let's go back to the rectangular marquee tool for a second. Let's say I wanted to make a perfect square. So I wanted both sides to be equal on each side. If I hold my shift key down, when I have nothing selected, it will give me a perfect square. Okay. Same thing for the elliptical marquee tool. If I use the elliptical marquee tool and I have nothing selected, and I hold the shift key down, it will give me a perfect circle. Okay, so that's important to remember. Now again, this is just the area that's selected. For example, if I take the brush and I try to make a mark across the screen, it will only show up in the area that's selected. Same thing if I want to use the eraser. It will only work in the area that's selected. Okay. So, now let's say you wanted to select more than one area. Let's say you wanted an ellipse shape up there, but you want a little square shape down here. Well, all you have to do is select the rectangular marquee tool while your elliptical marquee tool is selected. Hold the shift key, and you might notice a little plus that pops up there. You can combine these areas. So you can make all kinds of little shapes of selection by just holding the shift key down and selecting more and more little pieces of whatever you want selected. Okay, now let's say that I wanted to fill this all in with one color. And I didn't want to use the brush tool to take my time and color it in. That'd be kind of ridiculous. So instead of using the brush tool, we can now use the paint bucket tool, which is also found in your toolbar menu. And the paintbrush tool is going to be hiding right underneath this gradient tool. We'll talk about the gradient tool in a minute as well, but first the paint bucket tool. So it's right underneath your eraser tool, and it looks like a paint bucket. Alright, the paint bucket tool is going to paint a solid area of color wherever you choose it to be. For example, right now I've selected this area, so when I click in that area with the paint bucket, it should paint the entire area red. And there it goes. Okay. Let's say I wanted to have a gradient in this area. Well, let's go back to the gradient tool. Now, when you select the gradient tool, immediately you'll notice that these different options pop up here at the top, much like with the brush tool. First of all, it tells you, hey, you're using the gradient tool. Secondly, it tells you what type of gradient you're going to make. And the next, it tells you a little bit more information about that gradient you're going to make. So let's take a look at a few of these things. First of all, this first gradient, you might notice those checkerboards. That means transparent. So if I was to use this gradient, it would basically just be the foreground color over a transparent area. So let's see what that would look like. I can hold down Shift and make a straight line. And it might be hard to tell since the background's white, but this is actually transparent. It's not really red down to white, it's really red down to transparent. I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. And I'm going to color that layer a different color. Let's color it green. I'm going to go ahead and use the paint bucket and color it solid green. I'm doing this to help illustrate that transparency that I just showed you. For example, if I create yet another layer on top of this, and I select a new area, and we'll throw in an elliptical shape as well. Now I want to do that gradient from red to transparent. I'll select the gradient tool again. This time I need to change the color to red. Now when I do the gradient, you can see some of the green underneath. So hopefully that helps you understand the transparent nature of this option with the gradient. Now let's say I wanted to do a different gradient than transparent. Let's say I wanted it to go from red to white. I could select this one. Let me show you what that would look like. So there's red to white. Let's say I wanted it to go from orange to purple. That's one that's already pre-made for us. So there you go. Now maybe I don't want a linear gradient. Instead, maybe I want one that, this would be a linear gradient, like we've been showing here. There you go, linear gradient, one color to the next. Let's say I wanted a radial gradient, one that changed color from the center, much like a circle. All you have to do is click on that. Maybe I want a beveled radial gradient. That's what that would look like. Or maybe I want one that goes from the original color back to a new color, back to the original color. Let's see what that would look like. It's hard to see here, so what I'm going to do is back up until we have everything selected. I'll go up to select all, and I'll make that gradient right here. Again, it's a little bit hard to see that. Let's choose a different gradient option. That's kind of what that would look like. Let's try one that comes out from a star. And there you go. So you can do lots of things with the gradient. So you got your gradient tool, you got your paint bucket tool. Now let's say we wanted to create a selected area that's not necessarily, they cannot necessarily be made by an elliptical shape or a rectangular shape. So maybe a more organic shape. Well, if we drop down right underneath that, we got several things that we can choose. We can use the lasso tool, which will give us a free-form organic shape, like that. And we can go ahead and use a gradient there too. Or let's say we wanted to use the polygonal tool, which you click once to get it started, and then you can do a series of more clicks and finish it off like that. Again, you can fill it with a gradient. This time let's just use the paint bucket. So again, these are just areas of selection, and that pretty much does it for the selection tools. Now let's say if you want to move this object from one place to another, all you have to do is make sure it's selected and grab the little tool at the very top. This is your move tool, and you can just grab it and move it wherever you'd like. Alright, so those are the basics of the selection tools available to you in the toolbar. In later videos, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about the magnetic lasso tool and the magic wand tool and how you can select other areas besides the